So, originally, my next video was going to be a follow-up video to the Milwaukee Auto Show video that I released a couple weeks ago. And within that video, I was going to do a little extra feature on the Alfa Romeo Tonale and the Dodge Hornet. But then I realized that most people who don't care for a cars and chill type video will just click off before they get to anything meaningful. I mean, that last video wasn't really doing so well with numbers anyways. So instead, I'm going to do this video, an actual YouTube video, and cut right to the meat of a topic that I think is kind of important. Something borderline educational and what someone might want to watch if they're thinking about one of these cars. So, without any further ado, the Alfa Romeo Tonale versus its sibling, the Dodge Hornet, and where things kinda go off the rails for these cars. So first up, a little backstory. The Tonale. Firstly, that's how it's pronounced, Tonale, named for the Tonale Pass in Italy, like how the Stelvio is named after the Stelvio Pass. It is not toenail. Stop it, no one thinks you're funny if you're being purposely obtuse. If you legitimately didn't know, you're excused. Secondly, the Tonale was first unveiled at the 2019 Geneva Auto Show as a concept car where it was touted as the first mass-produced Alfa Romeo to feature a hybrid powertrain, which, for the concept, was borrowed from the Jeep Renegade. Alfa's now customary DNA drive mode selector was to be included, with the A mode, which is advanced efficiency, was to set the car in a purely electric driving mode. Although this concept featured many design bits and features that weren't even remotely close to being included on a production car, namely the interior, the overall look of the car and the hybrid powertrain did cross over into the production model. In fact, this is probably one of the few concept cars where the exterior design hardly changed whatsoever between concept and production. Platform-wise, the Tonale was set to be built on the SCCS platform, or also known as the FCA Small 4x4 LWB. A bit of a mouthful. This is the same platform used primarily by the Jeep Compass. However, that platform was to be heavily tweaked for an emphasis on performance for one terrain and one terrain only, the pavement. This meant quicker steering, 4-piston brakes, and torque vectoring, frequency-selective dampers, a ZF9 speed transmission for the 2-liter turbo models, NFT technology for maintenance records. Sporty, I guess. Overall, Alfa wanted the Tonale to be a class leader in terms of driving engagement, which is actually rather commendable given the crossover segment's rather notable lack of anything that doesn't handle like a shopping cart, at least not until you get to the more higher priced items like the Porsches. But perhaps even more important than that, Alfa Romeo wanted to move cars in the United States. When Alfa Romeo opened their doors in the US again for regular business, they came in with the 4C, a mid-engine sports car for the masses, unlike the extremely limited 8C Competizione, which was more like a feeler car. For the 2017 model year, the 4C was joined by the Giulia Saloon and the Stelvio crossover. So really, Alfa basically covered all of the basics for an Italian brand for the masses: a sports car, sports sedan, and a crossover for the US's expanding crossover segment. By the time of the Tonale concept's unveiling in 2019, it seemed to almost make sense for Alfa to introduce a new model. Sure, one could argue that it didn't because sales were never very high for their cars in those few years, but what better way to grab new audiences by simply giving the public more choices for passenger cars? Alfa in fact, currently they need to sell cars in the States if they wish to remain. And a new high press coverage model with currently popular hybrid technology they believe might be the key to future success. Not to mention that it will set them on their path to a full electrification, which they plan to achieve by 2028. Ultimately, the 4C left after the 2020 model year, leaving a wide open space for a new car, and for a moment, the Tonale was set for a 2020 model year launch. And then there was the whole COVID thing and the semiconductor shortage, and things came to a crashing halt. The Tonale was delayed until 2022, and then it was delayed again. By 2022, all Alfa had for the States was a European spec model to cart around to special events. In fact, actually, let me clarify. The Tonale did release in 2022, in Europe, and only in a very base form. It shipped in a few trims, including a special, more appearance-oriented trim called the Edizione Speciale, which is the version I saw in Texas for the COTA Grand Prix in August of 22. It was actually a sight to behold, the first new Alfa in a while, because although the Giulia and the Stelvio were aging gracefully, they were still doing just that. Aging. So it was quite exciting. Less exciting was the mill under the hood, a 1.5-liter hybrid with a fairly weak-kneed 160 horsepower. Efficient? Sure. Exhilarating? Not as much. In fact, reviews I've seen from overseas have all largely agreed, while beautiful inside and out, the Tonale isn't super engaging to drive. It handles okay in its baser form, but without the power and the other goodies of higher trim models, such as the more performance-oriented Veloce, it just wasn't all that engaging. What is promising, though, are the engine choices still coming down the line, including a non-hybrid 2-liter turbo inline-4 for European and Canadian markets, and a 1.3-liter inline-4 hybrid with a healthy, as originally advertised, 272 horsepower, which has since been rated in a more recent press release at 285 horsepower, a notable bump and also a slight bump over the base power of the Giulia and the Stelvio. And with an appearance of the American-spec Veloce trim at the Chicago Auto Show this year, it seems that 2023 will finally be the Tonale's year in the US. Or at least it would have been if it wasn't for that delay. Because, see, if the Tonale landed when it was supposed to, it would have had a head start over a little trick from Dodge. A little yoinks maneuver and a rebadge set to debut at the same time. I'm of course referring to the Dodge Hornet, Dodge's rebadged Alfa Tonale. And while I could be quick to lambaste what one could call a low blow from a rival under the same umbrella of Stellantis, I learned through my research for this video that there was actually a little precedence for this. The name Hornet, among automobile enthusiasts, is a weighted name, backed by decades of automotive history. It began in the 1950s with the Hudson Hornet, a revolutionary car from Hudson Motors that helped define what it meant to have sporty handling. Later on, after Hudson merged with Nash to form the American Motors Corporation, the Hornet became a Nash model with Hudson Hornet badging. Later, after Nash and Hudson became more clearly billed as AMC cars, the Hornet name was moved on to a compact car for the 1970s. This car was available in coupe, sedan, and wagon forms, and the chassis for the Hornet also provided the basis of the AMX and Gremlin cars. It was actually this version of the Hornet that became better known in some ways, thanks to a James Bond-related film appearance and a plethora of racing uses. However, the name was retired before the end of the 70s and ended up in the ownership of Chrysler after their buyout of AMC. The name rested until 2006, when it unexpectedly returned under the Dodge nameplate on a conceptual MPV. Dodge apparently had an interest in going European, but needed something more befitting of their smaller city streets. During development, various platforms already used by other European cars were considered for this new Hornet before they finally settled on the Japanese Nissan Versa to use as a base instead. The resulting creation was something that looked like every Dodge concept car from the early 2000s, which is to say that I think it looked rather cool, personally. There was a goal for a 2010 debut, but then some interesting things began happening. Firstly, the flavor of Chrysler merger for that decade, which was Daimler Chrysler, ended, and in its place came the 2010 merger with Fiat, which became Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, or FCA. Despite the 2009 financial crisis and Chrysler filing for Chapter 11, the Dodge Hornet began moving away from its Japanese base to something a little more pasta-flavored. Namely, a switch to the Fiat 199 platform, which, wouldn't you know it, already underpinned a small little city car from Alfa Romeo, the Mito. And then they went even further and began testing out the platform from the Alfa Romeo Giulietta. It seems like the Hornet name was destined for Italian underpinnings, and only now has the Hornet finally come to fruition, practically in the same way that it was going to back in 2011. Now, look, it's common for cars to share platforms under the same umbrella, so really, it's not rare for something like the new Hornet to grab the Tonale. But really, I guess it's just more interesting to point out that it at least seems that this was a long time coming, and maybe Alfa Romeo should have predicted it happening eventually. News did break that Alfa execs were displeased, and that's understandable, especially since it really seemed like it was out of their control. The Tonale gets delayed, and before they can get it out of the door, Dodge waltzes in and takes it for themselves to sell down market. And I think that's where the real controversy begins, if you want to call it a controversy. Alfa worked to make the SCCS platform unique for the Tonale, and all of their R&D is now going to a Dodge product that's cheaper to buy, has more engine options, and even has a high-performance model, the GLH, in the conceptual phase. And I've been told not to think too hard about it because, well, the Dodge is going to be a lower market. It won't have the same buyers. On one hand, sure, the guy going to an Alfa dealership is probably different from the guy going to a Dodge dealership. But what about when the Alfa dealership shares a lot with the Dodge dealership? Like the one in Kenosha, Wisconsin? That's a case of Tonales sharing the same space with Hornets. But one is more premium, right? Well, at the Milwaukee Auto Show, the Hornet on display was the base trim called the Hornet GT, and according to the spokesperson, it was virtually in base spec form. And it was optioned with the leather seats that's an extra cost upgrade in the Tonale. At which point I went online and found that actually the show model actually had to be a GT Plus given Dodge's build and price tool, which means the base seats are actually cloth trimmed with leatherette. But the Alcantara seats are a no-cost option in the base GT, which isn't the case in the Tonale. And even at the GT Plus's price of $35,000 American, you're getting a really similar interior from the $49,000 Tonale Veloce. And I was in both cars with the same seat and material choices. The GT at Milwaukee, and the Euro Spec Special Edition that was at COTA in Texas. It was the same interior and same quality from what I could tell, which, by the way, I should point out is actually very nice, and the seats are actually really comfortable. And to be fair, the interiors aren't exactly clones of each other. Notably, the Tonale features very different air vent designs and uses more aluminum and leather surfaces than the Hornet, which has a different soft touch materials in their place. Plus, the Alfa DNA drive mode selector is replaced by a push-up button start in the Hornet, whereas the Hornet puts a sport mode button. The Tonale's push-button start is located on the steering wheel. But when I'm talking about the similarities in the interiors, what I'm really focusing on is the price disparity and the undercutting in an already competitive market segment. Even the show's spokesperson expressed the notion that the Hornet makes more sense as a buy because of the shared quality and price difference. It's sort of akin to someone taking your science project and adding extra glitter to it and getting more attention while simultaneously throwing you out of the door. What I feel this can translate to then is that for a shared Alfa Chrysler lot, however many of them actually exist, like in Kenosha, a salesman showing a Tonale may be more interested in suggesting a well-spec'd Hornet instead. Not because selling a cheaper car makes them more money, but because they can sell more cheaper cars to more people than they can sell more expensive cars. Not to mention the confusion potential buyers could have when both the Tonale and the Hornet claim to be class leaders. Some quick notes to add include the aforementioned bump in horsepower to the Tonale, going from 272 to 285. Meanwhile, the Hornet RT advertises 288 horsepower. Note that the GT does 268, which is less than the base Tonale, and the pricing on the RT has not been released. Not a huge difference, but enough where they can puff their chest out a little more. And while Alfa may advertise their handling prowess for the segment, the Hornet RT also adds a boost button that forces an extra wallop of power into the engine to cut the 0 to 60 time by an entire second. And odds are they really haven't changed the suspension or the handling, meaning that they have the exact same setup as the Tonale. And no, I don't think the Tonale can really get a leg up over the Hornet because of an NFT system to log maintenance records. Which means that Alfa's hope that the Tonale would be a volume-selling car to put them into a better sales position may be dashed in the sense that when regular consumers hit the lots, especially with the current car market and rising interest rates, they're more likely to go for the cheaper Dodge, while the people paying more for the Alfa will likely be the same type of people who buy Alfas today, which are the same people who bought Alfas yesterday. You can sell it as a luxury performance vehicle, and maybe the Tonale has a little extra leather, nicer paint colors, and a more extravagant exterior, but it might be hard to sell the performance aspect when the competing sister model also comes from a performance-centered brand. Oh, wait a minute, the colors are the same actually. So, see, these colors are the same. This is just the same gold. This is the same red. The only thing different here is that the Hornet seems to, aside from the entire Alfa paint library, except for their new exclusive color called, That's an interesting tie-in. Well, so much for the paint color part. I guess that's the same. And most of the seats are the same. Now, this isn't meant to be a spec sheet video for both cars, but rather it's a highlighting of an event that feels a little bothersome to me for some reason. Sure, I'm biased towards Alfa Romeo. It's a unique, interesting brand I've always wanted to see succeed. It's a brand that exists for the love of driving. Of course, Dodge is kind of the same way, creating muscular, performance-oriented cars to inspire thrills and joy when the owners aren't using them for transportation. The brand exists for a different kind of driver. Dodge for those who crave raw, brutalizing power, and Alfa for those who want to feel the rush of a corner and ride it like a coaster, but they are really both driver-oriented brands. But I don't think I need this video to sound more like some unhinged rant that really, I guess, doesn't amount to an issue that's really all that world-crushing. And honestly, I guess I shouldn't be making any predictions because maybe I'll be wrong and the difference in buyers will be bigger than I'm thinking, because people may still go to the Alfa Maserati dealers, see a Tonale, see that it's cheaper than virtually every other car there, it's still pretty nice, and decide then and there that maybe they can afford a little bit of Italian passion after all. And without a Hornet in sight to make them consider their wallet, maybe they'll take the chance, and with any luck, maybe they'll fall in love with it, and remember the name when it comes to the car they'll buy next time. But that's only if the Tonale succeeds, or there can even be a next time. Because if it doesn't, then Stellantis' mid-range premium brand may lose its footing in the American market once again. And who knows if they'll ever return after that. And while that wouldn't be world-crushing, it would maybe be just a little soul-crushing. Thanks for watching.